So, we've got some good news for the people who find Arknights Enfield's gacha system incredibly confusing, because according to YouTube, it's the most complex thing that we have had in this space. I will admit, all jokes aside, it's a little bit more layered than your typical gacha system, and it does potentially attempt to confuse people who struggle with this sort of stuff, I guess. I don't necessarily find that myself. It's pretty straightforward personally, but it does have some extra layers to it. And we're going to go into the devs actually talking about changes to the system itself to make it less confusing, and potentially some currency changes as well. What does that mean? How much will the gacha system itself actually change? And where do we go from here? We've got this interview with Games Radar here for the lead developer of Arknights Endfield, where they go into talking about the gacha system, the way people interact with those systems, and what they want out of the system itself, and how players perceive it going forward. They also do go into talking about the actual factory system as well, and how difficult it is to create a game in the post-Genshin era. That a lot of people get into these games, and within the first hour, they kind of know what's going to happen within the next 20 hours, which, let's face it, I do think Enfield falls into this pitfall itself, right? If you've been in gacha games for a while, you start playing this game, you kind of know what's going to happen, especially in terms of systems, all that jazz, and the story in its current state. Where this game offers something unique, though, is actually the factory system, and this is a really good thing for this game. It's what makes Enfield stand out, and according to the data that the developers have got as well, compared to the contemporaries, people are spending more hours in their play sessions of Enfield, which is obviously great news for the people who want to see more games in these gacha games. You know, there was a statement that was scoffed at where people would say Arknights Endfield is a game first, gacha second. There is more to do in terms of core systems within Arknights Endfield, but it still does suffer in terms of events and lacking endgame at the moment, which hopefully will change over time, which they do go into as well. But they do actually talk about the base building, the factory building, should we say, and what they plan to do with it going forward. And I must admit, I'm happy to hear this. So, this is coming straight from Ryan. Our strategy is that we are not going to make it harder and harder, he explains. We don't want players to go deeper into calculations and math. We just want to bring some more new, more different, but not harder game mechanics into the building systems in future versions. Threading the needle on potential depth and necessary knowledge, which that makes me happy, because base building, the factory building, should I say, doesn't need to get harder. It doesn't need to be infinitely more complex. It just needs more. It just needs more new, more different. Now, whatever guise that takes, I don't know. Whether short term, we look at potentially merchants that come in that want you to build specific recipes that are quite unique, or actually entirely unique. You need to build items with random items in the factory that requires you to adjust your factories on the fly to output products that can net you massive credit potential potentially, or get you access to massively discounted items that encourages this rotation and change of your factory systems, and just building new stuff, and obviously adding new systems and mechanics going forward that are not directly tied to building your character. Because obviously, if you just go harder with the factory system, which I know some people want, it's going to be tied to your character builds, getting new gear, leveling characters up, and potentially people are going to be put in a position there, especially when it comes to gear and your essences and such, where they're going to be starved of potential cash, and it makes it more frustrating to just build units. You don't want that. Now, if they do go more complex, you'd want that to be separate and aside from actual character building, in terms of creating things like gear and the stuff that you need for your character and your account, right? So I do agree, they don't need to go harder. Different, more is better in this situation, right? So basically, this is them just going over how it's kind of hard to build in the post-Genshin world. You've got lots of games trying to do the same thing, and it's harder to stand out in this space, which is something I've been saying for a while. I'm worried for the gacha space. Genshin created us this potential to go into this golden era, if you will, and I'm worried that the golden era is going to be lots of games doing exactly the same thing and kind of looking the same and feeling the same and playing the same, and I'm a little bit worried about that. But let's go on to talk about what they say about the gacha systems here, right? So, Arknights Endfield lead says good gacha systems don't impact the player's ability to enjoy the gameplay, and Endfield is trying to fix its confusing gacha, which I agree with. Good gacha systems, if there is such a thing as a good gacha system, is supposed to not interfere with your enjoyment, right? You want to be able to access all the content and potentially at least get a baseline clear of all the content. As somebody who is free to play, and especially a small spender, you don't want that to be the realm only for the whales. Now, is it fine to have targets that whales themselves can go for? Of course it is. These games have to drive incentive for people to spend, but you want it to be balanced in such a way that doesn't lock out the people who are free to play or are low spenders as well. And it seems like they're cognizant of this, right? So let's have a little read through what they've got to say in regards to the gacha and potential changes that might be happening as well, because it does say we're also calculating how many pulls players can get every version, which 1.0 had plenty of pulls. The worry is that people are a little bit worried that maybe 1.1 isn't going to be as rewarding in terms of pulls. I actually do like that the game isn't front loaded. I like getting rewarded as I play through the world with pulls. I like that. I'd rather have it like that, but I understand some people want it front loaded, want it up front, so people don't feel like there's less pulls, but there's actually lots of pulls in 1.0. It's just you kind of have to work for them. Some people don't like that, right? So let's have a look what this got to say here then. So even by gacha standards, progression and monetization in Arknights Endfield is pretty confusing. I've got to disagree, but as I said at the start of the video, lots of people do agree with that. Before and at launch, the newly released action RPG spin on Hyperglyphs Arknights drew criticism for convoluted currencies. This is true. A lot of people hated it. Opaque character drop rates and pity maximums and a rotating banner system that obscures how your investment is tracked. In an interview with Games Radar Plus at GDC, lead developer Ryan, his preferred name for press, discussed the response to Enfield's gacha system and some plans to refine it, as well as the impact of these systems on games as a whole. So, for the people who've been screaming for changes to be made, your dreams might actually come true here, guys, because I honestly believe a lot of the nitpicking that goes on with Endfield all goes back to people like drawing a line on the gacha system. So they've like decided to hate every aspect of the game. And that's not true with everybody, of course. There's a lot of valid criticism on this game, but I do genuinely believe with some of the vocal people within this community, it all harks back to they disliked the gacha. Some people liked it, so now they've got to be anti-Endfield all the time. Ryan acknowledges different responses to gacha systems between Asian and Western audiences, which is true. People can be critical about the gacha part of the game because they are not used to this monetization method. He says, but in East Asia, players are more used to the gacha system. True, right? CN, Korea, JP are a lot more happy to be involved with gacha systems, a lot more willing to spend lots of money as well. It's a bit newer to the Western world in terms of this particular gacha. Gacha itself, in terms of random items within loot boxes, FIFA packs, isn't new. But for the general, specifically the JRPG role-playing game part of it, it's a bit different if you take away MMOs. And they're starting to get a little bit more used to it now. It's becoming a bit more accepted in the West and a lot less of a faux pas, if you will. It's going to take time to catch up. CN is always going to be number one, but I think the tide is changing, and that might not be a good thing for people watching this video. You might look at that and go, that's actually a bad thing, but it's just what's happening, right? We've got to be cognizant of what's happening. But even some folks who fluently speak gacha balked at Enfield's dated and complicated setup. I would disagree that it's dated, personally. People have just got so locked into the pull at 90, 50-50, a guarantee on the next banner. Whether I go for the same character or decide to go for a different character and then I have to pull for a weapon separately. I think people are so locked in on that the seat is dated. I think the rebates for the weapons and the guarantee at 120 for me personally, somebody who's selective on the banners I pull on, much better for me. And it actually doesn't feel dated, but I can understand some people seeing it differently because a lot of people are attached to the pseudo safety net that is pity carryover, because it basically encourages you to pull more, but it makes you feel safer in doing it as well. It encourages you to gamble. It really does. So Hyperglyph is eyeing improvements. Ryan says we are giving out more in-game currencies, great, for a start, and we use the questionnaire and our in-game data to see if players are feeling paywalled by the gacha system. I hope they actually listen to this, right? Because if people are feeling that, I can have my opinions, but if people are feeling that, hey, great to see changes made, right? And if things get cheaper for me, I'm happy. If I'm happy with it now and it gets cheaper, buzzing. What I would like to see is more standard pulls. I think in terms of premium pulls, it's been fine so far. Standard pools, it would be nice to get more because it's a really good supply of Arsenal tickets. The weekly, it's a piece of shit. Who cares about that? That needs to be improved. More ways to get Arsenal tickets outside of Origeometry and premium pools, right? Allow me to get standard pools a little bit more commonly. I think that would be a better system personally. Or just give me more ways to get Arsenal tickets directly and actually at a good rate. Well, I suppose for everything else, I've not really got many issues with the system personally. So, to help offset or prevent that paywall effect, the opening hours of Enfield have been adjusted. Ryan says, and designated selection permits have been added to let players grab a character of their choice quickly. Most of the players can build a top tier team in the current version, and I think that's a fair thing to say. I think you can build a team that's capable of clearing the content in this game at the moment, and if you can't build a good team that's at least clearing everything at a baseline, I'm not too sure what you've been doing. Now, some people might struggle a little bit more with trimming medals and stuff. Of course, that's just how these games are, right? That's just how games are in general. But I would assume if you're at least competent with the game and understand mechanics, because when it comes to things like Umbral Monument, it's less about DPS checks and steamrolling content. It's about actually understanding the mechanics and countering the mechanics. You can really do it with what you've probably built in this game. And as I say, if you're not at that point, I don't know what you've been doing. So that's our goal, to give out more resources for players to build useful teams, he continues, and for players who think there are too many currencies in the UI and it sometimes can be confusing, we're also trying to combine some of the currencies to make it more clear for players. And we're still creating more questionnaires for the next version to see if adjustments work, and we hope to receive more feedback and in-game data to see if we need further optimization. Interesting. But then he does say, in a follow-up comment, a Hyperglyph representative clarified that these gacha optimizations were at a discussion level with no firm changes to share immediately. Somebody heard him saying that and was like, shit, Ryan, shut up. We don't know about that just yet. It's a discussion. We've got nothing to share. But what I get from that, what changes? Because I can't see them getting rid of Orabella and Origeometry, because there's a reason why you have two premium currencies in these games, because certain countries won't let you use a currency to directly gamble with, right? To directly go into the gacha with. So this is why a lot of these games have split currencies. And it's not just gacha games, it's a lot of these games. You use money to get a particular currency, which you then transfer into another currency, and that's the currency you use to spend on most of the items in the game. And then some games allow you to use those other currency, the first currency, to buy cosmetics and stuff. But when it comes to the more gambling-based items, they have a secondary currency, and that way it avoids any of the regulations that have been introduced that would potentially block them from doing these things. So I don't think that's going to change. I don't know if they're talking about like bond quotas and that sort of stuff maybe changing to try and make that look a little bit less confusing to people. I'm not too sure what that could mean here, but I'd be very interested to see. And I'd be interested to see what you guys think about this as well. So we could actually be seeing like changes actually coming to the gacha maybe, but in terms of like the UI, I can't see the system changing, right? I just can't. Who knows? Maybe they get enough feedback that that's something they start to discuss. I just don't ever think it will, right? And if it did, I think you could wave goodbye to the guarantee at 120 and we'd have a more traditional system. And Arsenal tickets would be much more difficult to get as well, because I think it would potentially destroy the gacha system in this game personally if they go down that route. Honestly, I do. So like many of today's Western gacha players, I got into the game genre through Genshin Impact and have tried other games since I still play Genshin regularly, but from day one through today, gacha systems have always seemed to me like you tolerate, not something you enjoy. I think that's fair. I also do think there is some enjoyment to be had in gacha systems sometimes. Look, gambling can be fun. There's a reason why people do it, right? It is really nice to get a character sometimes because you know you could have lost out. It feels good. I think there's a dopamine hit there, but I don't disagree with what they're saying here, right? High rolling is fun, sure, but that's a flimsy defense of a predatory system, which I compare to alcohol, fun in moderation, but entirely capable of ruining you. I don't disagree. You know, not as bad as alcohol, because at least you're not going to get the physical effects, but you're definitely going to potentially get the financial effects, which could ruin you. I asked Ryan about the unavoidable friction of gacha and monetization first, fun second system built around luck and scarcity, and how he defines a good gacha system. He says, the important part is to find out how players in-game are affected by the gacha system. We have to ensure that players, including free players, are not paywalled by the system. He adds, they can experience all the content. For us, it's important to monitor all players, including free players, what team they are using, what difficulties they are facing in the combat of the world and the dungeons, and can they build and experience most of the game's content. That's a major concern for us. And that's a definite good thing that they're looking at. You want to be able to experience every part of the game and potentially clear majority of the game as a free-to-play player, right? And then the extra special zero cycles and sub 3 minute clears or sub 1 minute clears are for the whales or for the people who are just mentally cracked, right? But of course, I think there should always be that level where you can at least experience the game as a free-to-play player, not only for the people who play entirely free-to-play, but for the times when you might be struggling yourself and you need to go free-to-play and things change in the game and you hope that you can still experience it like you could when you were spending maybe, right? You never know the hard times you can fall on, right? We're also calculating how many pulls players can get every version to see how many characters they're expecting to get every version. Those feedback questionnaires and in-game data ensure that to minimize the impact of the gacha system on the gameplay experience, most of the players are not affected by the system to enjoy our game. But still, there are options for paying users to acquire more characters. Of course, as I just said, they want you to be able to at least experience everything as a free-to-play player, or a paid player's always going to get that little bit more. It's how it goes, right? More combinations and play the games in a more personalized way. So for me, so basically what I say there by more combinations, you're going to have all the characters, whereas the free-to-play player can get some of them. It's about how many they can get and how much they can experience, right? They've got to balance it to encourage spending, but also allow people to enjoy the game, right? So for me, I think the most important part of the gacha system is not to impact the player's ability to enjoy the gameplay. Good to hear. Good to hear. Dev speak, but good to hear. The necessity of pulls per patch map demonstrates the irreconcilable give-and-take gacha systems. At best, they can be more generous and less frustrating. Personally, I find myself hoping for less gacha cruft entirely and more games like X Asterisk and No Strings premium RPG released by Hypergriff. If you didn't know, they released a box price game, basically. You can buy the game, it's one and done. It didn't look like it did very well, though, right? It didn't set the world alight, but the people who played it actually said it was quite a lot of fun, and it felt like it was almost a bit of a testbed for potentially some things in Enfield as well. So that came out in 2024. Ryan says X Asterisk was one of our attempts to try out other possibilities of the JRPG on mobile and reasons. There must be other possibilities for these games to develop in the future, but maybe we need to try more ways of monetization. So basically what that says there to me is, yeah, shit flopped on a financial side, really. So X Asterisk didn't make money, and they ain't going to do that again. That's what I gather from there. We're probably not getting a box price game again from Hypergriff. We're probably going to get live services, and they're going to try different monetization systems, which would be interesting to see. Maybe subscription-based, maybe cosmetic-based, which a lot of people would say, let's do that. But a lot of games don't manage to make that work. There's a reason the gacha space makes so much money and is exploding. It works. What can I say, right? Well, yeah, I'll read from that. We ain't getting another X Asterisk, not in terms of the game, but in terms of the way it was monetized, which is a shame, because box price games, of course, have the place, right? One and done experiences are great. So I think what we can get from this is there's potential tweaks coming to currencies, maybe. Feedback, they're definitely very interested in. We might see changes coming to how many pulls you can get as well. I wouldn't be surprised if we get some changes to the standard pulls and more ways to acquire Arsenal tickets. I think that's one thing where some people are struggling, because people really don't like the fact that they feel punished by getting characters early, and then it's that discussion, that choice to, do I continue pulling? Do I use the origami of Gar, or do I just skip the weapon, right? But one thing I will say, though, which kind of alleviates that as well, the Battle Pass weapons that you get for each banner so far, for each patch, have kind of really worked really well for the on-banner characters, so there is that. But I definitely would like more ways to get Arsenal tickets, definitely. So, yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see, but they're considering changes to currencies, to the UI, and looking at how free-to-play players are paywalled as well. So the game may get more generous, it might get more player-friendly. But the biggest thing that I take from this, right, is the talk about the actual game itself and doing different things. Not just in the factory, but doing different things in general. Because I do go over in this part as well about trying to differentiate yourself from things like Genshin. And I'm happy to hear that. At the minute, apart from the factory and the way the combat works in this game and having the 4 players on field, because I do think that differentiates itself for me personally in terms of endgame and events. We're not quite at the same level. The factory is so unique compared to other gacha games. The events kind of fall into the same line. So let's see them do different things there. That's what I'll be looking for. Expansion of the factory and give us better endgame. Do something really special with Etch Space Salvage. Make it unique, Hypergriff. Make it something special, because I believe it can be. And if you haven't, check out my video. I'll link down below. Cheeky plug for my ideas about Etch Space Salvage, because I actually think I've got some decent ideas on how to improve that mode, and I'd love to know what you guys think about it. But yeah, the devs are listening, apparently. But of course, we have to be cognizant. Devs say this a lot. We'll actually have to wait and see if devs listened. But yeah, I'm happy to hear this, and I do want to see the game go in the right direction. The next few patches will tell, right? One thing I'm a little bit disappointed that wasn't really spoken about here was the story, because I really would have liked them to talk a little bit more about the story and to talk about how they're going to go forward with that. It's a shame that the person really didn't lean into the story questions. I guess that's something that wasn't on their mind. It was more about the strategies and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I really want to... I would love to know what the devs think about where the story's at, if they're happy with it right now, and what they think going forward. Because I think 1.1 was an improvement. I do think we've got a lot of way to go, right, to get to what we've had before from Hypergriff. But I'm happy to wait for that. But guys, I'd love to know what you think down below. If you've enjoyed the video, give it a like, subscribe if you're new. I'll see you all in the next one. Ta-ra.